What's up, everybody? Derek Lambert, Myth Vision Podcast. You can see I've just moved in, so let's let some people roll in here. I'm going to get some stuff ready, and I wanted to touch on some things. It's been a minute since I've done any interaction with you guys, so I want to touch base with you, let you know what's going on. And thanks a lot for everybody who's been patient. Yes, it seems like it's been a Dr. Price show. I know there's been a lot of Dr. Price. He lives an hour from me. Can you blame me for wanting to drive over there, take my camera, and film the gentleman in person, pick his brain? He's doing a lot better, by the way. So let me pull up these comments, see if I could see everybody who might be commenting, watching the show. And we're going to touch on some interesting subjects today just to give you guys an idea of where we're going with Myth Vision. So give me about 20, 30 seconds. I will be having a guest join me here in just a minute. We'll have him on the screen as well. And I want to do a lot more of this interactive stuff here on Myth Vision Podcast, bringing you scholars and letting you guys ask them questions yourself. These are people who they're experts in their field, particularly on the subject matter we're going to discuss. I want to bring a lot more scholars to Myth Vision, so be on the lookout for that. Let me check out, make sure I got everything going here. All right, here we go. Pulling up my YouTube here because StreamYard is what I'm running this through, and I don't know if you guys can hear or see me. Maybe you can comment, let me know that you guys can hear and see me. All right, it says I'm live, but my thumbnail is not looking too spiffy. I had a thumbnail in mind here, so let me start this, I guess, over because the thumbnail's not it's not up like I thought it would be. Maybe I need to do that. I don't know. There's a way to change it. Look, I'm going to get back on this live here. Just give me 1 second. I'm going to cancel this out. Guys, be on the lookout. I'm going to have another live pop up, but I'm actually going to have my thumbnail correct so people know that this is a live going on. I can get you guys. Oh, wow. There's a lot of people just popped up. Okay, guys, you're here. Perfect. I just was wondering where everybody's at. Maybe it's the thumbnail or something. All right. Everybody's on Facebook and YouTube. I'm on both here. And I wanted to bring you guys some stuff. We got 26 people in right now. I have a project that has been on my heart for quite some time. You know, I do a lot of that on Myth Vision. I know a lot of you guys may not care for some of the subjects that might get brought up. And then some of you guys are like, wow, I never even knew that or never thought of that. And that's exciting. I'd never even thought that was even an idea. That's kind of what I'm all about. You know, I don't really spend too much time dealing with epistemology and arguments for why people believe in things and, you know, just critiquing people's faiths and stuff. There's plenty of channels out there for stuff like that. What I like to do is hear crazy people like Dr. Price. Practically, he's drawing up my adoption papers. You know, every time I go over there, he's like, son, come sit down, son. Santa Claus is going to give you your presents. But no, he like practically is ready to adopt me as a son, if you will, just because he loves me, man. I love him too. The guy's full of information. But, you know, when you hear a guy say that Yahweh created the world from the carcass of Leviathan, who the hell says that kind of stuff? Like, where are you going to hear this at? I mean, this is supposedly in one of the source materials from the Old Testament or Hebrew scriptures, that there's a place where God creates everything from the carcass of Leviathan. What the heck is going on, guys? I mean, who do you know talks like that? So Myth Vision Podcast has this interesting theoretical stance on presenting new ideas and various ideas to you. How many times have I been wrong? How many times did I think I had the answers and then found out there are flaws in my position and said, damn it, I got to tear down the walls, all these giant walls that I built, thinking that I was right. Now my ego has to deflate. Now I have to pretend like, oh, well, I got to try and somehow humble myself to accept that the ideas I once held as true may not be so true, may not be the case. And I'm willing to do that with new ideas, even if I am wrong about my ideas right now. But I'm going to test it. I'm not just going to accept what I'm being told because something sounds right or it might appear to me and what I see is right. And I'll continue to test. Now, I've got 32 of you guys on my end. I don't know if there's more of you watching or not. Let me see if you got more here going on. So I see 29 people watching, guys. I just want to let you know, and I'm going to have to update this thumbnail because most people probably just see Myth Vision and not even know that this is a live going on right now and me touching base with you guys. I literally moved in. As you can see, I've got boxes. I'm not even done unpacking in my house. There is a project right now that we just met the goal on. Fingers crossed, everything goes smooth. Dr. Richard Carrier is going to be coming on the show to do a couple shows on this idea called Israel Only. Not only is he going to do a couple shows, he's going to write a thorough article delving into the position, pros and cons, and what he finds out about it. If you guys don't know much about him, Dr. Richard Carrier once was a historicist, and crowdfunding allowed him to delve with undivided attention into the view of, did Jesus Christ actually exist historically? Or is he an angelic figure, a fictional being of an angelic sort, something to that effect, the Doherty thesis? And after deep investigation, he came out saying, this is a highly probable position, according to his view. I, of course, am open-minded to that being wrong as a host. I'm very open-minded. But Dr. Carrier has written a couple books, and they are peer-reviewed. He has on the historicity of Jesus, and I know that he has delved deeply into these subjects. Well, why not have him delve into another subject called Israel Only? And that position, I'm not going to go into extensive detail, but I want to read to you guys something that I actually found written by a IO proponent. You might go, what the hell? What the hell's IO? What is Israel Only? What is this idea? It's this harmonization method. It's this overarching satellite view of the Bible that from Genesis to Revelation, all it's about is the biological genetic kinship relationship of Abraham and his seed, and that from him many nations will come, and that these nations are ultimately the elect among these nations will be redeemed. Now, some of you guys might go, I don't want to hear this thing anymore. I'm tired of hearing about it. Some of you guys might have been rubbed wrong, but I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to discuss this. So if you don't like it, that's cool. We'll have other videos come out. But if you're like me and you really want to challenge, this is a theory I think is worthy of talking about. And here's why it's worthy of discussion. Not saying they're right, but another professional scholar, Dr. Jason Staples, which will be interviewed on Myth Vision podcast, has written what is a new perspective or a fresh look at the Gentiles in Romans 9 through 11. Interesting, because there's four major views that float around on who the Gentiles are in Romans 11, and that all Israel shall be saved. That's an interesting concept. Is he saying that the Gentiles are part of Israel? And in what manner does that matter? How is that real? So you go to history and you go to fiction and you're trying to find out where these things mix. Well, Dr. Staples has written an article. He's writing 2 books right now and has written 3 blogs on Dr. Ehrman's post on his position. Now, I've, of course, pitched this to the Israel Only guys on Facebook and said, now's your chance, guys. Now's your chance. Like, you harped on Dr. Price. I understand Dr. Price had answered a hip fire question, had no time to prepare, but I know that they scoffed and said it didn't answer, didn't touch the Israel Only position. But when you actually look at what critical scholars think about this in real history, the northern tribes that were scattered, so to speak, in the Assyrian conquest, a lot of them went south. So technically, the consummation of the 12 tribes was in the south, at least to some extent. The reality was that whatever remained into the first century must have been a Jew by the first century. There was no diaspora lost, uncircumcised remnants out there of Israelites according to real history. Now, I don't know what I'm talking about according to most of these people, and I'm being sarcastic by saying this because I'm actually friendly with most of them. Some of them are sarcastic assholes, but, you know, when you get into these discussions, who isn't? And I'm going to be having a friend of mine here join me here soon. He's in the lobby right now, but he's going to be talking about some of the stuff that was recently brought up on an interview with Jason DaCosta. So Jason DaCosta and me had a similar path. Let me give you guys a little background. I was a fundamentalist Christian, hardcore. Like, Jesus was my Lord and Savior. I asked him into my heart. I went to church. Like, I loved God, and I really read his word, and I believed every word of it. I even went on air one time years ago. You know, you ever see those Facebook memories pop up, and you go, I said that? I actually said that. What the hell am I thinking? I said, if the Bible said that Jonah swallowed a whale, I would believe it. How freaking ridiculous does that sound now? Okay. Very ridiculous, but I was passionate. I want you guys to feel my energy here. I loved the Bible, and it was one piece. It was 66 books. No, it wasn't. It was one book written by one author, God Almighty. And let me tell you, I went into that preachy stuff, right? Look, today I'm digging deep. Tell me what the sources say. Tell me your criticisms. Tell me your pros, your cons. I'm open-minded, because if I think I have the answer and I've come to my conclusion, get ready, Derek. You're going to have to get your chisel and your hammer and break down another damn wall, because you're going to keep building walls until you, I don't know, finally realize you don't know much. And if you want to know something, why don't you get into the field, learn the language, delve into the criticism, peer review, really test it out. And then at the end of the day, make your conclusion. That's what I'm about. Myth Vision Podcast is not just a podcast. It's a journey. It's a real serious inquiry on trying to know what the hell happened and what's going on. And I want you guys to relate to me. I love this. I love this. I love the exploration of hypotheses, different theories. I love that, because as soon as you think you got it, you're going to read another book and go, does that really, can I really make that marry? Let me try to make that harmonize. Or are these different authors with different points of view that are trying to present something and sometimes even attack another view within the canon itself? Oh, no, that can't happen. This is God's word. Anyway, that being said, let me give you guys a little gist here. There's been a little, I guess you'd say, emotional battles going on, little Facebook wars, YouTube chatter, all that kind of stuff over this theory. This theory it needs to be dealt with, and it needs to be seriously analyzed. But Dr. Jason Staples comes close in some ways, but does not conclude what Israel Only is saying about actual diaspora Israelites in the first century. So to me, there's one of two types of positions ultimately that the Israel Only position is going to have to fall in. Fiction 100%. Completely made up story about fulfilling the connection of northern and southern Israel, called the two-house theory. Or Paul thought maybe, well, they did accept the message, and if they accept the message, they must be somehow Israelites. But in reality, what is really going on? So that being said, we're going to bring a guest on here, guys. I didn't really read your guys' questions here or comments, but I love you guys, and thanks a lot for sticking around this long, because I'm passionate about this. You guys know I'm passionate about this. And if I wasn't, look, if this was about only what you guys wanted and I'm out here making a living, which was an accusation that, oh, Derek only makes money doing Myth Vision. Dude, this is my life, man. I love this. I do this every day. I eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. And it's a passion of mine. So I do like to listen to what you guys have to say. However, this is a personal journey of mine. I'm trying to figure it out. I've tested many theories. I bring it here. Even if I don't fully conclude the theory, I still present it. You guys might see something that I don't. Hey, Derek, have you thought about this? I haven't thought about that. Why is Israel only on my lips if I'm so against it? I'm not attacking it, but I am going to test it critically. And I'm looking at this, but I'm not the scholar in the field who could see the Greek, who really sees what's going on. And with that being said, I'm going to bring on a friend of mine, James Stevens Valiant, author of Creating Christ. He's written the Creating Christ book. It's similar to Atwell in some sense, but I know that Jason DaCosta did a video recently talking about the Roman provenance theory and how does it stand up in the grand scheme of the overarching picture. We're going to have James talk with me today about this. Like I said, before I bring him on, I'm not 100% sold on anything, right? Even his theory, and we have wonderful conversations, but this guy's full of history and knowledge and information. Show him some love. James, here you are. Welcome, brother.
Hey, how you doing, Derek?
I'm doing, man.
Wow.
I'm doing.
Get myself properly, situated here.
Got some shots fired, right?
Yeah, well, I haven't yet. To be straight, I haven't yet seen the video at all. I don't know what he says about Roman providence, and I'm looking forward to checking it out.
You're a flat earther. No, I'm just kidding.
But the truth is, you're right. Well, let's. I'm not a flat earther. It's absurd.
I know. I'm just teasing you.
You see, at some level, we can say a theory is absurd, right? I mean, It's not that the truth is always up for grabs, but I generally agree with what you said. Every theory has to be critically tested. In other words, we have to entertain in our heads, could this be true? Could this be true? Could this be true? Only when we have, let me put it this way, exhaustively considered the possibilities, and new possibilities are going to come up. And, you know, even at the end of the day, if someone says my theory, Roman providence, is absurd, or that IO is absurd at the end of the day, the way we're going to find this out is by giving every theory, even weird, wrong theories, even theories that are dead wrong, a full hearing. You know, the English philosopher John Stuart Mill said, sure, you want idiots with bad theories to get a loud megaphone and a big platform. The best thing that could happen for truth is for people who are dead wrong to be given a full hearing, and for the truth and for other people to engage with it. And so
100%.
with my theory of Roman providence, I figured the way to do it would be to put all my best arguments, at least the essential fundamental arguments, into a book, and to write it just as carefully as I could, cite the sources that were influencing me, cite the original material that I was using, show pictures of the ancient coins that I was using as I'm discussing it, present my theory as carefully and as clearly as I could, and then submit it to every scholar in the field, mythicist or historicist, Jew, Christian, atheist, everyone out there who's interested in this topic, who expressed any interest. And I'd go out there and say, you want to read this book? I got this theory. And what's interesting is that we've kind of challenged IO to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Give us your definitive statement of this. Give us your best arguments, at least your most fundamental ones. Put it together and send it to scholars. Offer it for critical response from real experts. Yeah, who know the history, who know the languages. Absolutely. That's what you've got to do. And you've got to present it to a variety of viewpoints. And you've got to be willing to accept. So my whole approach with Creating Christ was write the best book I can, send it for critical review, see what the world thinks. Maybe serious scholars are going to find serious holes. Maybe everyone will agree to say, oh, well, no, you know what you're missing is this, and they'll show me exactly what I'm missing, and we'll now learn. And the cause of finding the truth will at least be advanced.
I agree with that.
Dismissing that. And only by gathering up a wider and wider context of truth, including things that aren't true, right? And why they're not true. We've got to integrate all that if we have any hope of coming close to the truth. And as you've pointed out many times, this is ancient history. We're talking 2,000-year-old stuff. We're talking fragmentary evidence. This is not, easy to figure out. We are going to be tentative. We're going to be making hypotheses. We're going to be making theories. And especially in that kind of context, what we need to do is present our theories as best we can and present them for critical analysis and engage with others in a civil and civilized way that focuses on the topic and not one another and what our motives are and who's paying who. And, that's absurd.
I think most of the time, James, I'm sorry to cut you off. I have to say this. I think most of the time what happens with theories, and I wish it was better in the non-believing community, because I expect it from people who believe, having a vested interest in these things for faith and whatnot. But I wish there was better communication among those who are not vested in that manner, so that personalities don't prevent the possible pride or ego that can cause you to really want to investigate a theory. That happens all too often in the field, which is why I and MythVision try to connect scholars. I mean, let's keep it real. I'm not so sure if Dr. Price would have ever communicated with Atwell or you. You know what I mean? If it weren't for someone saying, look, these are great guys. Like, everybody's great here. They want to present their information and they really appreciate your work. And then, of course, Dr. Price took into consideration listening. And of course, he wrote his review of your book and he read it and he says, oh, this is really interesting with the whole synoptic.
It is in that critical engagement that my thinking improves. That, not only have we opened up Price's mind to another way of looking at things, perhaps, at least it's possible, it's reasonable in his mind. And not only that, but by critically engaging with us, he'll improve my thinking. So in either case, we'll get closer and closer to the truth as time goes on, presumably, if that is our goal. And we have to be grateful for correction.
Well, that's the Israel only theme that was the topic here, that we finally met our goal. with Dr. Carrier. Like it took a few days, it wasn't nothing. I really appreciate everyone's help on that, because now he's going to be able to spend some time on the project, which I hope.
That's great.
I'm not giving up hope that down the road you won't be able to communicate with him too on your theory, but fingers crossed. You never know. But right now we know that's on hold at the moment.
Well, let him do this first. You know, he's going to need time to do that. I know that, you know, at his request, we did send a copy of the book, and he's had it even longer. But I'm perfectly willing to wait. I'm a patient man and a patient cause, and
you have to be.
And I look forward to critical engagement. That's why I send the book out widely to as many scholars who would listen as possible, because only through that critical engagement can we possibly hope, to get at the truth here.
I think it's important, obviously, to test those things, but I'm happy to have. Well, I've learned a lot from the Israel Only guys. I will admit, I really have a lot. I've never took into consideration trying to examine the biblical text in such a way that they do. Do I think there's some issues? Sure. But I wish it wasn't a personality thing. It almost seems like if a book was written, and this is why I've pressed on that, and I'm thankful I heard Jason DaCosta had someone who's going to write a book, whether it's going to be sourced out and like really intense or not, doesn't matter. Just get the theory out there, present what it is, have a couple other IOers before you actually publish it. Say, yeah, this is good in our book. This works as a theory. We all would stand behind this. And then you have something to actually stand on. But I think a lot of times what happens is personalities get in the way and stop or slow us down from really being able to discuss in an open manner. Because look, you know as well as I know that there's an apologetics movement of IOers towards Christians, and they are trying to get Christians to leave the faith and realize that, hey, you're not an Israelite. This isn't for you. The narrative isn't about you. It's first century. And even if it did open up, I've heard them say this, even if it did open up to people beyond Israelites, the story ended at 70, blah, blah, blah. 70, right. Now, people who are, I was a full preterist, James, right? Which means I had hook, line, and sinker believed the end did happen in the first century because it was supposed to. So I was like, okay, it did.
Well, Jesus said it would.
Right. And
Point
so I
blank
said,
in all three of the first gospels.
it would. And so why are critical scholars not realizing, when I've deconstructed, why aren't they seeing it did end? Why can't they see what I see? And then when I talk to them, like, hey, buddy, we agree that it was supposed to end, but it didn't actually happen. And I'm like, hold on. So I realized, no, it did happen because we had defined terms in a certain manner in which they did. Now, some things did happen, written retrospectively, and some things may not have happened, maybe. So I started realizing, okay, there's more than one thing going on here. It's not just one simple...
Right. There's a lot of moving parts. And frankly, the Israel-only part is easier to understand, and the mistakes that some people at least make with it are easier, I think, to refute than some of the preterist thinking, because I don't think that the Jesus apocalypse and the very insistent timing that the synoptics give for this glorious coming of the Son of Man in power, an adequate explanation. I think scholars should really consider that more. The preterists have brought up a point that has been inadequately dealt with when it comes to preterism, it seems to me. I don't think their response makes much sense. The very basis that we have, the most important basis that we have for thinking everything wrapped up in the first century, is that Jesus apocalypse. In my mind, though, that Jesus apocalypse has such a bold prediction with such specific details that it could only be a miraculous prediction. Not one stone shall be left on another. Armies in the clouds.
Right.
The false rebel messiahs. The siege conditions that are described, like the siege of Jerusalem, that would have, it's on all fours with Josephus's description of the fall of Jerusalem in such detail, miraculous, dubious details like the armies in the clouds, but also the temple will be leveled to the point that there's not one stone upon another. Oh, okay. Now that is a specific, detailed, concrete description that I believe could only have been written after the event. And but if everything wrapped up in 70, why would there be any reason to write about the event anymore?
Retrospective, yeah.
Exactly. So I don't think the logic makes sense. I think the Gospels, and indeed most of the New Testament, was written after 70. I think Christianity was just getting started in 70 in an important sense. On the other hand, Jesus insists that people there listening to him would live to see the events that he was talking about, apparently including the glorious coming of the Son of Man.
Yeah, we've had this discussion too. Like when you start getting into actual critical scholars that have been examining these texts and they start to consider dating on these texts, and you look at Paul, the consensus of the 7 authentic Pauline letters, suppose they are authentic, suppose they are the 7 that are pre-70. You are stuck with a conundrum. There's a conundrum here, James. And the conundrum is did Paul really know the future? I mean, like, you got a couple different options here, because if he wrote in the 50s, as scholars say, these 7 authentic Pauline epistles are in the 50s. And what Io and Full Preterist have done, because I was Full Preterist hardcore for a long time, they take the synoptic apocalypse. They see not one temple or not one stone on the temple. They see the earthquakes and famines. They see false Christ. The whole 9 are listed. And then they go to Paul and they see, according to Acts, of course, which connects to the actual Gospels too. But they connect these. Oh, we had various earthquakes and famines. Oh, there are false Christ out there. Snap, there are rumors of war. There's all this stuff that connects. Now, this is Acts, which is also written by a gospel writer, Luke. So you got to ask yourself, is he really connecting? He might be connecting these two, but Paul himself believed the end was near. And if he wrote in the 50s, what end did he believe? Did he believe in a temple's destruction end? Did he really think that the apocalypse was this 70 AD scenario, as Full Preterists are saying? Or is Paul's apocalypse being built upon in the fictional synoptics? So when you look at that,
give us a date.
Right.
Paul doesn't give us those detailed descriptions of the temple's demise or the false messiahs or the siege of Jerusalem or the armies in the clouds or any of the details that Jesus gives in the Gospels. And that's one reason for distinguishing at least some of Paul's letters from the Gospels in that very timing. I mean, the Jesus apocalypse is one of the things that helped us date the Synoptic Gospels. Paul, like all Jewish apocalyptics of the time, thought it was coming, and it was coming soon. All you have to do is look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, and whatever date you give to the Dead Sea Scrolls, 100 BC or 60 AD, we do know that there were Jewish sectarians who believed that the battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness was going to happen. It was going to happen soon. It was going to go down. And something big is happening, and it's around the corner. It's going to be a messianic advent and of some kind, a cataclysm, an apocalypse, a judgment of some kind is going to go down. Say, Jewish apocalyptics, even before Paul. Paul is joining this movement. Paul is accepting the culture and literature of these people. To Paul, this is just the background context. Something big is going down. The battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness is going to happen, and it's just around the corner, and you better be ready. You can hear it. You can hear it in the Gospel's description of John the Baptist too, right? Make ready the path of the Lord here, because it's going to come down. The Messiah is coming, and we got to get straight with the Lord.
and so I think what happened with the church just giving a tip off to this whole thing, in reality, right? Because one can go, these are fictional tales, and I agree to some extent. Not every book is complete fiction, in my opinion. I am open to the idea that there are Pauline letters that are being written to actual people in a certain time that actually are believing some of these things, which, if this is what gets me, if this is all just fiction completely, did someone just pick up this book that was not an Israelite, wink, wink, that just said one day, let's make a church out of this thing? No, to me, there was an ongoing evolution of thought from probably a primitive Jewish movement that grew into a larger Gentile inclusive. And when I define Gentile here, I mean allowing people who are non-Israelite or just anyone who would accept the faith by then would become by faith.
I think we have to accept that something like Galatians is actually letters or pieces of letters or an authentic letter by someone. I don't imagine that Christians, any later Christians, would have invented the argument that Paul has with James and Cephas in Galatians. It's very heated, strong. Paul condemns them outright. They're going to hell. Apostles who knew Jesus
are cursed.
Are cursed. They're already condemned. My gosh, they're cursed.
No,
And
he's just being mad at his brother. They're best friends. What do you mean, James?
he confronted Cephas to his face, and James
Right.
was spying out his freedom in Christ. No. And it's angry. The language is very angry and heated. He doesn't care who these pillars are or what people think of him. I'll tell you, the gospel I got from my own revelation is what's true. He's
Right.
getting all, defensive about it and stuff. So that was not in Acts, they sort of gloss over and play down that whole argument. So it was already an embarrassing argument by the time Luke Acts was written.
Right. And he brushes over some of Paul's stuff. Paul doesn't care if you eat meat sacrificed to idols. But Acts 15,
Acts sort of
damn sure does.
Some of that stuff, doesn't it?
Yeah, he says you are not to eat meat. So which one is it? Is it okay? Is it not? Oh, you do not. And then, of course, the harmonizing method always comes in and finds a way. Well, he was only speaking to these people at that time. And that's why it didn't matter if but these people right here. Come on, guys. Give me the goggles. I need the goggles. But
see, that's the thing. These documents are not like they're consistent with one another. There are all kinds of inconsistencies between the authentic Pauline letters and the Gospels.
Right.
On the other hand, the Gospels and Paul also share certain things that are unique in all of Jewish literature, okay? That are definitely, something very different. And as I've said before, a big elbow in the road. Paul is criticizing Torah. There is nothing in Hebrew literature before that calls Torah,
the law, a curse,
a burden, a slavery, a curse. Paul's language is really intense. Oh, James was spying out our freedom in Christ. And so that tells me that the argument in Galatians is actually of the moment. That is to say, if it's something that James and Paul are arguing about, it's not something that Jesus had previously settled, as the Gospels may claim, something about kosher diet, say. Or implications about circumcision. No. Those may be in the Gospels, but reflective of Paul's existing Torah criticism.
Absolutely.
One of the things about I.O. that I think they don't really see, in fact, I'll go back up and I'll be really broad about it. They have a lot of powerful insight. And Paul's use, for example, of the regathering of Israel, those prophecies. And there are prophecies, starting with Hosea, but also echoed repeatedly throughout Hebrew literature of a regathering. Israel will be regathered. There will be a redemption. Now, when, the prophets were writing 500 years before Paul, in many cases, there's still hope of a regathering of Israel. That was still a practical hope or possibility. As you point out, it may also reflect the fact that many Israelites did migrate south for safety and were regathered and did come back into the fold. But also, as time went on, it's simply bizarre to think that people who were truly blended into the Assyrian Empire would centuries later even know that they were descendants of Israel.
Well, they didn't, yeah.
A teeny percent, maybe like a Senator Warren's Indian ancestry, a teeny percentage of their ancestry centuries earlier, was Israelite. Well, okay, so you're 1/1000th Israelite. Would you even know that? Especially if you've lost all of your traditional practices.
Which is why I have to give a tip of the hat to Jason, DaCosta, because he's coming along in the path which I think is going to require the position to go down, is the fictional route, that the Holy Ghost is just seeking out the lost. This is like a seed detector that knows the elect seed.
And Paul suggests that. Paul says that if it's written in your heart, you are the elect.
Right.
How do we know that you're the elect? Well, it's written in your heart.
This is the thing I told Stephen, though.
Physical circumcision doesn't matter in Romans, right? It's a circumcision of the spirit. It's an inward thing of the heart. Circumcision, spiritual circumcision is what matters. And that's what Paul's doing. He's spiritualizing this stuff, including descent from Abraham, including membership in Israel. He's actually twisting the prophecy. There's nothing in the Hebrew prophecies that says, well, all aliens may be blessed by it, but all aliens now become part of the redemptive thing? I don't know. It may be suggested in some ways, but Paul is definitely grabbing on the idea that now that Israelites have been mixed in with Assyrians, that means any Gentile can come in. And let's
That
face
was
it,
our point. Yeah.
that really appears to be. Dr. Staples has really kind of shown this to my satisfaction.
Right.
That's what's going on. Paul is taking over a pretty much defunct prophecy that has no hope of practical fulfillment 500 years on. And he's taking it and using it as a means to open the door to Gentiles.
That's a great question. Is everybody touched by Israelites by this point? At least when I say everyone, God forbid, I don't mean Aborigines, Indians in Australia. I mean,
they weren't
the table of nations.
Yeah. Obviously, they weren't aware of Native Americans, or South Africans, or East Asians. No. The world to these people is the Roman world in the Near East. Okay, and that's the world to them. It really is. The Roman emperors, for example, called themselves rulers of the world. That's how ancients perceived the world, is in limited geographical units. As much of the world as we know, the known world, let's put it that way. The Romans rule the known world. And that's how we have to really look at it. The nations of the known world were the nations that Rome sort of occupied and dealt with. That's how it was viewed.
So that's a good question, James. I think that's an important point when we're looking at the New Testament. One can make the statement, just look at the narrative. Look at the narrative, and just what they're implying is look at the narrative, look at the Old Testament. They want you to read the New Testament narrative through the lens of an Old Testament prophecy, as if this is actually doing what the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament is saying, and not really take into consideration that when this document's being written in a Hellenistic period by Hellenistic possible Jews, which is very likely, the influence of what their Hellenism is causing them to document here by their reading of the Hebrew or the Septuagint is going to I don't think that's I don't think that's considered as an interpretive method by Israel only, which is what I think is super important when you look at a document. It's like if I pick up a piece of literature from England in the 1700s and I'm reading in modern America 21st century with my own understandings and things as I'm documenting something I'm reading from the 1700s, there's going to be a different. It's not the same thing, no matter what I do.
We have to take enormous care to read in our knowledge, our perspectives, our 21st century attitudes. That's what that's one of the main things we have to do when we study ancient history, is put on our ancient history lenses. How are these people looking at things? You know, I've made the point many times, there's no difference in those days between religion and politics. If a war happens and somebody wins, we need a divine explanation, whatever our religion, whether we're polytheists or monotheists, there's got to be a religion. What happened? Did the gods get irritated? Did Yahweh punish us? Did we somehow start idol worshiping and deserve this? But the idea, though, that the New Testament has properly or even close to accurately fulfilled the expectations of the Hebrew prophets is absurd on the face of it. There is no triumph of Israel in the first century. The reason why those rebel leaders were pretend or false messiahs is because they actually believed what the scriptures told them. The Hebrew scriptures told them that a Messiah would lead the Hebrew people to victory here on earth. Israel would bring the rod to the nations, said Isaiah. There would be this glorious triumph where Israel is a blessing to all the nations, for sure, but they're large and in charge, like the glory days of Solomon, at least. Okay, there's going to be this glorious victory for Israel. If there's no glorious victory for Israel, then Isaiah's messianic prophecies don't seem to be accurately or properly fulfilled, and no such thing happens in the first century.
So now you got to change the meaning, and I think it works out fitting with Platonic philosophy influencing a Jewish mind, if at the very least, because now you have Stoicism and Platonic thought. Is that even thought about?
Jesus and John can say, "My kingdom is not of this earth. My kingdom belongs to another dimension altogether." Messiah doesn't pertain. Oh no, that's Plato.
Right.
Obviously,
So
there's nothing.
this is important when you're
there's-
interpreting, is my point.
Right, exactly. But you can see how someone like Philo, a first century Jewish philosopher who knew his Plato and knew his Stoicism, but also was a Jewish scholar and knew his Hebrew scriptures, how he saw things allegorically. Aha. So if Daniel says the Son of Man will come in glory, meaning Israel will have a glory day, and that's really what it means. Israel will have a glory day. They didn't actually mean that whoever's writing Daniel didn't actually mean there'd be a dude, a Son of Man, glory in the clouds. That's all part of his dream with the beasts and so forth, which is all allegory. So plugging in that allegorical thinking with Daniel, you can imagine, there's this spiritual level that's going on. So we can read everything in two sort of ways, a literal way or this totally spiritual way, which Philo has. And boy, Paul seems to have picked up on that big time. He is taking these prophecies and abusing a good deal of the language in them, even to accomplish what he wants to do. For example, the regathering prophecies. You go back to Hosea, who, the prophet of Israel, who says, yes, there'll be this fall. God will divorce his wife, Israel. But don't worry, one day they'll get back together. But what will bring them back together? What will cause them to remarry? God will remarry Israel. Why? How?
Right.
Because they'll go back to Torah orthodoxy.
That's every depiction, even of these. This is the interesting thing. When you go to the Hebrew scripture to find the regathering, even the regathering comes back to Torah. So this is what's like. You gotta really.
But Paul
consider this,
saying we're now free in Christ.
But
Paul
see, that's a big red flag.
Paul is saying you don't have to be circumcised in the flesh, just in the heart. Paul is saying forget circumcision, kosher diet. He's saying we now have this new relationship to the law. He's arguing. He argues in multiple places, and it's maybe the central argument for Paul. We're now free from the law, thanks to the death and resurrection of Christ. Christ's death has reoriented everyone to the Mosaic law. No previous Hebrew writer had claimed to be Hebrew writer had ever said that the law was a burden, some form of slavery, some form of curse. Yet that's the very language that Paul is using. We're now free from the burden of the law, thanks to Christ's sacrifice. Nothing like that was anticipated.
I could see a Hellenistic Jew, though, coming on the scene and saying, look, it's obvious we're not able to keep this law, and if we don't, we're going to have a problem. We're just going to keep getting judged, so something else needed to happen.
To this day, keep that law, though. In other words,
I'm just pointing out why Hellenistic.
Right. It was the practical needs of Paul's Gentile mission. Getting rid of the specifically Jewish strictures, like kosher diet and circumcision, however important, fundamental, and essential they are to Jewish practice, means the covenant of Abraham, circumcision. Paul is going right to the heart of the most basic, fundamental, definitive practices of what it is to be Jewish, and saying, it doesn't really matter. Why?
I think that's interesting because his enemies, Paul's very enemies, are trying to Judaize Paul's audience, which is a big, huge, that does a whole nother thing with the interpretation.
It is clear that there was missionary activity by Jews in the first activity. There were non-Jewish converts. Another thing IO seems to imply
before 70.
Yeah, exactly. Is that before 70? Well, we all know, and even IO has to concede that there was a bunch of interest right after 70 by Gentiles. It's called the faux Christianity of the Roman world that they dismiss, right? The universal Christianity that the rest of the world picks up on. Well, no, even before 70, it didn't just magically start in 70 or at the end of the first century. We know there was interest. We know there were converts. Josephus describes Syriac people in the Near East who were converted to Judaism. He describes Greeks and Romans who were converted to Judaism. We know that Seneca, the philosopher, who echoes the golden rule of Rabbi Hillel, was interested in the substance of Judaism. It could be that Nero's second wife, Papa, was converted to Judaism. We have all kinds of evidence from Josephus and others that Gentiles were being converted. It wasn't taking over the whole empire, but we do know that a large empire, which Rome was, had a whole bunch of people who were interested in, and some converting to Judaism, and at different levels. Some weren't getting circumcised, but still going to synagogue and worshiping and praying Yahweh, but not going the full circumcision route. But traditional Judaism says you're not a member of Israel until you go the full circumcision route. And it's that difference, that sectarianism. The Romans really didn't like that. They thought that the Jewish people thought they were superior, and they separated themselves out and were better than everyone. And so they're haters of all mankind, is the way it was put. They're antisocial, right? Look at what Paul's doing along those lines. No. You can eat with Gentiles. You don't have to be circumcised. Oh, and peace with Rome, Romans 13. Right? So a lot of the things that must have been an important part of first century Messianic Judaism, right? Torah, orthodoxy, a strict sectarian identification of Israel. See, Israel only's right about that. There must have been Hebrews in the first century who were so sectarian about their Judaism, right? The rebels, for example. Now, this isn't exactly I.O., and this is what they really have to look at. Even the rebels, who must have been ultra-conservative Jews, would allow allies to help them out and join their cause against Rome, but only if they got circumcised. Circumcision.
So I think I see our problem here, James. I got to comment for a second. Give me 1 minute, because this is important.
Yeah,
I think what I'm going to... Look, everybody knows that James is my brother, but you guys really don't know how tight we are. I mean, like, I can call him about anything. But James even tells me, he's like, cut me off if I keep going. But I'm doing this because I think it's important. I like what Jason DeCosta is trying to do by saying, look, you got dead people rising, you got blind people seeing, a lot of fictional mythology here with resurrections, and they're supposed to fly off into the sunset as divine beings, as angels of God, so to speak. Israelites are now, the 144,000 are now never going to die, and it's fictional, and we agree with this. I think the problem is going to come down to when you're looking at, is there any history in this, what I like to call historical fiction? And I do think there is something there, convoluted at best in Acts and the Gospels, but there is something here that I think needs to be understood in the context of the first century. And of course, the wake of the second. But I want to read something to anyone who might be Israel only, who might be checking this out, or anyone who's interested, who's never looked at this. Dr. Richard Carrier, when I approached him on the subject, of course, I'm sure a lot of IOers know I'm a skeptic, and they know that I don't buy it. And I'm like, okay, I'm open-minded to certain things, but I don't draw the final conclusions the way they do, things like that. They probably, and I know I'm not going to say they probably, based on my reactions by having Dr. Carrier take into consideration of doing this project, a lot of them seem like they're bracing for impact. They seem like they're like, oh God, he's about to just come and attack IO. He's just going to fail. I've had a lot of people who've trolled me already that are like, he's just going to fail, just like Dr. Price. And they're just like slamming this whole thing like, you're wasting your time. And I'm thinking to myself, I feel like I'm actually doing them a service. Any publicity is good. But secondly, listen to this comment that Dr. Carrier wrote me in a private message after I said, please, we can't wait for you to join and get into this subject. He says, sounds good. And be aware, as I mentioned in the first place, the idea that maybe Paul thought every Gentile was actually a lost Israelite is plausible. I don't know how probable it is, but it's not silly to contemplate. So my a priori position is not strictly hostile to the idea. I just am skeptical it can be proved to any usable probability, but we'll see. So he's not an enemy of the idea that these Gentiles could be Israelites. Right. The problem is, he said in that comment, maybe all of him, like all the Gentiles that he bumps into that are accepting this message, he is then probably logically conclusion, well, the only reason they would accept it is that
lost Israelites.
That's a possibility.
And there's nothing definitive really, even if there was something definitive on that, I'm not sure it would substantiate all of IO's claims, right?
Right, of course.
Because look, you and I could believe that Paul thought,
and still not
all of his Gentiles, right?
Right. IO has a lot of different stuff that comes in. That's this two-house theory that implies no one outside is a recipient of
all Israel stuff has to be thought about carefully, right? Are all Israel the elect, the 144,000? No. If all Israel isn't elect itself, then obviously then we have to say, what is Israel? Who can join Israel? What is properly Israel? And, the Gospels are full of all kinds of suggestions that I think are extremely uncomfortable to I.O. Jesus says that God can make descendants of Abraham out of stones. Right?
Did he? I mean, look, why would he say it? Why would he say it? Right? So according to the fiction, maybe that's what he means he's going to do. Create Israelites out of stone. Who knows? Because, I mean, the implication I heard, there's two different ways of viewing the Galatians 3 idea, according to the standard view. And this is like even Dr. Jason Staples practically accepts this concept that by faith, notice that you say, like Calvinists do this with Arminians all the time, it is grace through faith, not of works. And they're like, back and forth. Right. Well, it is by faith that someone then becomes a son of Abraham. And a
true descendant of Abraham.
Right. So Israel only says Israel only says you must first be a descendant, and then by faith you become you're an elect descendant
wait a minute.
of Abraham.
Paul is saying that Abraham and the patriarchs were saved by faith themselves.
Right. Paul's argument.
So if it's open to Abraham, who's not a descendant of Abraham.
Well, yeah, but
Paul. No, seriously.
They're going to argue that, though. I understand.
You can argue that, but there's nothing implied. I mean, in other words, Paul's argument would seem to suggest, well, gee, if Abraham could be redeemed by faith before there was any Mosaic law, then why can't I? I can be redeemed by faith, and that's it. It's by faith. It's by, Abraham was the obedient and the faithful one. I see. So by being faithful, by grace, I can become a descendant of Abraham. Why not? See, Paul is actually making a very clever argument, isn't he? In instituting circumcision, God was saying, Abraham, you and your descendants are going to be special. And so they were. But, you see, just as the prophet said that the sin of Israel had caused their defeat and God's divorce from them, their coming back to Torah can cause their redemption and the redemption of these Israelites. Paul is totally taking advantage of this scheme, of this ideological scheme, to say, oh no, what matters is circumcision of the heart. Right. That way we can regather all of the lost descendants, a practical impossibility by his time. A prophecy that had
in real sense,
in a real sense, no practical means.
And if there was, James, I'll qualify this. If there was a real sense, all you got to do is pick up Josephus. He tells you where they're at. They're all east of the Euphrates,
maybe. Yeah. Right.
So why is he in Rome, headed towards Spain? It makes no sense. So
Spain. We're told he's going to Spain. Wow, that's odd.
But and he didn't make it supposedly. So
most people say he didn't make it.
Right.
Some people say he did. There are all kinds of theories, right? But the point is, if his letters are any indication, we know his missionary activities were in the Aegean area, Galatia, Thessalonica, right? Corinth, Athens, if Acts is right. So his missionary activities, from what that really happened, are happening in the Greek world, around the Aegean Sea. There is no indication that there are lost Israelites there. What we do have is an indication of a post-Alexander the Great, post 4th century migration of Judean Jews who kept their identity and were well aware that they were Jews in diaspora in the Greek world for commercial reasons. That's what we know is there. We have no indication, and there's no indication that Assyrians would ever plant people there or get people there. It's absolutely bizarre to think. So, I think it may be a religious trick that Paul's doing. If you're converted, if it's written in your heart, if the word of God is written in your heart, then you are elect. Then you are one of the elect. Then you are a descendant of Abraham. I think that's a little trick that's going on.
It's like the fundamentalist church that says, if you come down and receive this message, you're God's chosen.
You're God's.
I want to be chosen. I'm going to believe it now. Right.
Well, don't Calvinists do a similar trick?
I mean,
right?
in a sense, yeah.
If you are,
Yeah.
if you
If
are
you
a good
live, and if you
Calvinist,
get like strict into the 5 points and the perseverance, as long as you persevere, then you know you're elect. But make
you
sure
know
you
you're
keep
elect.
persevering,
Keep
and as long as you
persevering.
keep it going, you're gonna be, yeah. So, and then at the end, we can all go, "He died in elect," so we know he was chosen. It's like, dude, do you know if you're chosen or not? And can you lose yourself? So
Well,
many different things.
God
here,
must know at least, right? He's written
Right.
in the book of life long before any of us were born. So
Right.
God knows who the elect are, and Paul is just perhaps. I don't know if that's true. I think that whether Paul believed all his Gentiles were descendants of Israel, literal descendants of Israel. I mean, he
Right.
wouldn't need the spiritualizing if he literally thought they were all. He wouldn't even need the adoption or rebirth idea. If you're a descendant of Israel, all you need is to get remarried.
Right.
After the
Look,
divorce. You don't need to be adopted.
To be practical with the view here, I'm with you. I think Paul is looking at it as he doesn't buy that this guy Joe Schmo actually literally must be.
Right.
I think what he's saying though, and it is a spiritual sense. Even Dr. Staples, the very man that let me throw a few names out there. Michael Bradley, Michael Bieris have tagged me countless times with Dr. Jason Staples because he's a serious scholar and he comes close, but he doesn't conclude what they're saying.
Well,
he doesn't follow the full logic. He does believe, though,
a study of the regathering prophecies and how Paul uses them.
Right. So I wanted engagement there, and no engagement happened, James. I said, look, guys, now's your time, because he just posted 3 blogs, and he's still looking at them right now. It's not over. The time's not up.
Right.
I would love to see
coming out next year and so forth, right?
At the end of this year, and I'm going to be interviewing him on the show about this very topic.
Great.
Yeah.
No. He's done a PhD on this topic.
Right.
Right.
His dissertation is in
no
this.
one less than Bart Ehrman is promoting this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, no, this is serious.
It's important. Let me say this for our Israel-only friends. This is an important topic. Don't ever take that James not following the full argument as like it's not an important topic. This is a very important topic I think needs to be discussed, because another scholar in the field, Professor Paula Fredrickson, wrote a book called Paul, the Pagan's Apostle. And in her book, she delves deep into this concept, and in passing, I hope to get her on the show. Fingers crossed, because I read her book. Is a really good book, but interesting, totally different type, but it touches on this in a passage where she says Paul doesn't believe that his Israel or his Gentiles are Israelites. Paul believes he's actually gathering in the nations, because she spends a lot of time in her book quoting Old Testament passages or Hebrew scriptures that show the nations, not the regathering, the nations themselves coming in, and that Paul wants them to remain the nations, which is why he doesn't want to circumcise them. And then she says that his enemies, the enemies of Paul, think that Paul's guys are the 10 lost tribes. So now you've got, like, what is it? Is Paul believing that his Gentiles are actual Israelites, or is Paula Fredrickson's idea that the nations are here, or is Jason Staples correct when he says this is a twofold prophecy being fulfilled? The nations as well as the regathering are all simultaneously being fulfilled in this spiritualizing of the first century in times context,
i.e. the nations,
right,
to be included, right? And that's really what the point is. Here in the New Testament, for the first time, we have a doctrine being expressed that says Gentiles, the nations, can now be included in a clear way. It's not clear to me that the Hebrew prophecies ever really envisioned a total opening of the door like that.
No.
Israel will be a blessing to all nations, but it's not clear to me that everyone and sundry could join. But that's what Paul is using it for, and that's the intent. Paula Fredrickson, she basically thinks Paul was only engaged with Gentiles, right? He was
she
not
believes,
in any serious
she
way
says some
Jews.
bold, bro, that's a bold statement. She says Paul is writing his letters only to ex-pagan pagans. Like, and I don't want to
Paul's letters, he actually will signal.
Interacts with Jews.
And he'll signal in the letters, okay, my fellow Jews, okay, and those who aren't. It does appear... Again, something I.O. doesn't seem to notice, but there does appear to be times when Paul is talking to his fellow Jews and talking to outsiders.
Well, they do notice it, but what they do with it is different than what I've seen scholarship do with it?
Well,
You see what I'm saying? Like,
but the standard do it. I mean, in other words, if you read that in the letter in Koine Greek, you'd say, "Oh, he's talking here about Jews, and here he's talking about Gentiles."
right.
So, what they need is a second layer of interpretation for that.
They have a
rather than just-
prerequisite, right?
See,
So that's the question. I really wish that Paul just, instead of using the word nation or nations or ethne in Greek, it would have been much easier if he just said Israel and Judah, like the whole time. That would have been much easier to say, "Oh, here's Israel and here's Judah."
If Israel only is correct in that sense, Paul is only talking to literal Israelite descendants. Well, Paul could have been really clear about that. It would have been real easy, because they have to admit there are multiple times when Paul appears like he could be talking about, I mean, in Galatians, he's neither Jew nor Greek. He's talking about
you have
this
to
adoption
interpret what
word,
Greek means through the IO lens in order to know that it means Israelite, right?
See, exactly.
And there's a lot of that happens, and that's why, look, they can scoff at me, but that's why I said a book needs to be written, not so someone can get rich off a book, or let's mock someone because we want it in a book. Guys, when you say Greek doesn't mean an actual Greek, but it means an Israelite Greek, come on. We ask that you come up with a book that builds your case so that it can be presented. Because look, guys, I communicate with serious scholars. I know that most of my friends that are IOers are online debating Christians. Most of these Christians, have very little education in this. They just know from Sunday school and Wednesday service, and they read their Bible at home. They don't know the depth, the criticism, the deepness. And this is a good question. This is an argument somewhat from silence, so please don't take this as a logical fallacy. But my point is, there's so many atheist readers of the original languages that don't want the Bible to be true, right? As Christians want to say. Even IOers will say, they don't want it to be true, but they argue against faux Christianity. Do you not think for 1 second that someone would have come along and said, "Ha, you guys are full of crap. You're putting on shoes that don't fit you. This book is nothing to do with you"? How come they didn't use that argument? How come no hater of the Bible, hater of Christianity, which there's been a lot of them throughout history, has not said one time, "You dumbasses, what are you doing? You're not biological descendants of Abraham"? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. See, in one sense, Israel only is correct, but only in a superficial and really banal sense.
A theological sense.
It's all about membership in Israel. It's only about membership in Israel. The question is, who can join Israel? Yeah, it's only about the Jewish God. Maybe the one consistency that all the books of the Christian Bible have is that it's all about the worship of the Christian God.
Right.
So in one sense, yeah, of course, Israel only is true in one way, right? In another sense, though, they're getting it all wrong if they think, well, let me put it this way. One of the central intentions of the New Testament is clearly to open up things to Gentiles. They've got that almost exactly upside down, backwards, and inside out, from what I can tell. It is sort of seeing things completely in its X-ray image. Matthew's couldn't be any clearer about the scope of Christian salvation. The examples are numerous. Look, the lost sheep passage does not say what they think it says. Matthew is writing aware of Paul's status as the first apostle to the Gentiles. So what Jesus is doing is merely defining the scope of his own missionary activities, the lost sheep of Israel, right? In other words, he's not saying anything about the redemptive or salvation effect of Christianity. That is implied when he actually disobeys the disciples and helps the woman, the Canaanite woman. In other words, Jesus is there to help, to actually provide the help to even foreigners. So even the lost
I saw a
sheep
post
passage,
like that on Facebook, something about like
even the lost
it's
sheep
not for the dogs, right?
In other words, they've got it backwards. Even the lost sheep passage. See, what Matthew is accounting for is that apparently that pre-Pauline mission did not go beyond Jews. Right. So knowing that, Matthew is accounting for that. But he's saying, no, but Jesus would be perfectly willing to help the Canaanite woman. What's on display there are the contemporary bigotries that must have existed. Romans hated Jews, Jews hated foreigners. There's a lot of bigotry going on back there. Oh, yeah. And that's what's reflected with the dog's comment. And Jesus is defying that bigotry and helping the woman. But look elsewhere in Matthew. You've got the centurion. And there Jesus, look, the Jews are going to be gnashing their teeth when all kinds of foreigners, all kinds of nations sit down at the feast table with Abraham. Point blank says universal salvation. Now you need your special Israel only glasses to understand that this centurion can't be a real Gentile, nor is Jesus really talking about other nations, just lost Israelites
in those nations, right? It's the dispersion, okay. And the message is simplified, okay? And I heard this
Jesus could have said, but before you go there, Jesus could have said that. Jesus could have said very clearly, and I mean the Israelites of the dispersion. He does not.
Right.
He says
or the author of Matthew.
In other words, in the context of dealing with his centurion and helping a centurion out, another foreigner he's helping out.
Right.
That statement cannot be interpreted as Io would have it. In other words, the context to use the narrative framework to use their language actually suggests the very opposite.
I want to share something, James,
because it's unrestricted. And
let me share something I think is important with this. In Galatians 4, we talked about this before, right? Those who are under the law, the idea that the Galatians are under the law, the salvific point. All right, I'm going to share this screen. Let me see here. Share screen. All right, share. Let me see. I'm just going to share the full screen if it'll let me. Maybe it won't let me. Let me try this. Let me see if this shows. Nope. There's my email. Sorry. Let me share. You guys don't need to see my email. Let me share something. Right. Where's this at? I got an IO project here. I only want to share the Galatians 4 part because I think this is important in light of the interpretive method that's utilized. We're looking at an English version when they're creating doctrines on this and coming to the conclusions that they come to. I'm just going to share. Will it let me? Yeah. Entire screen. Let me know when you can see that. Okay. All right. Let's see. Whoops. I'm messing up here. Nope. Too much. There's too much noise going on here. Let me stop share. Share screen, and this one right here. All right, here we go. Now, do you see that? Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is from a Greek friend, someone who studies Greek, my buddy. Okay. And he actually, I think, drew this from either he created this himself or he drew this from one of the Greek scholars who's written commentaries on Pauline epistles. But in Galatians 4, verses 1-7, now I mean that the heir, as long as he is a small child, is no different from a slave, though he is the Lord, owner of everything. But he is under guardians and managers until the date set by his father. So also we, when we were minors, under the elemental forces of the world, were enslaved. But when the fullness of time had come, God sent out his son, born of a woman, put under the law, and because you are sons, in order to redeem those under the law. So what you're going to see, he has it color coded here, and this is going to go, I believe, Dr. Carrier is going to go into this, but these letters, these colors connect in the Greek syntax. So you have to understand how to read and understand grammar in Greek to know what connects. We read it in English, and the way he described it was if you were to write it as it literally is in Greek, it wouldn't flow in English very well.
It wouldn't make any sense. No. In fact, if you think about English, some of our idioms and some of the way we organize words would just be nonsense gibberish in a foreign language, even if they understood what each of our words meant.
See the conjunction here? So that you are no longer a slave. Well, the red and blue, what happens in English is we see slave, red, we see blue, and we say slave is the son. Or you start to see and connect these English terms next to each other. And sometimes I'll open a statement, do a paragraph, and then at the end, I'm actually referencing what I said at the beginning, but not the meat in the middle.
Right.
And that is what's going on in Galatians 4 here in the Greek. And you should check your Greek scholars out on considering the interpretations of these books. They're saying those who are under the law are the Galatians that are being adopted as sons, etc. And here in the Greek, it actually is saying this group, he came to redeem those Jews first who were under the law, and then, of course, those who were not under the law. And I think in Romans chapter 2, it's clear that even the Gentiles in Romans 2, if you were to say the nations, They're the ones outside of the law. They're not even under the law. So there is a lesson to be learned here that there are people who are outside that aren't under the law. I think Israel only interprets the Galatians as being under the law. And in Greek here, this stuff needs to be really delved into. This is why I go to scholars. I'm not going to go to...
The implication here, when you look at the Greek concordance and study the Greek, I'm not a Greek expert, but nobody, I mean, I think all New Testament scholars should at least be familiar, right? You don't have to get a PhD in Greek, but you should be at least familiar with the Koine Greek.
Absolutely.
And the other thing is that you should have the concordance at your side when any of this comes up. Listen to what the experts on ancient Greek actually say. It's really what I find odd with IO sometimes is that whether you're talking about a historical fact, could there be lost Israelites that could be identified in the first century, or whether you're talking about a linguistic debate in Galatians or Romans, about who could be Israel. It's like historical fact and actual language don't matter to them when it seems to me those are the critical pieces of evidence we have to attend to. And they'll say, "Oh, it's all myth anyway." Wait, slow down. No.
Is it historical or complete myth?
But does it say what you think it says?
Right.
Or is the history possible that you think is going down? Right. Those are actually the questions to ask, right?
Well, I think that because their interpretation, right? Remember, they're full preterists to begin with. That started before that. Most IOers that I know were always full preterists prior to becoming Israel only. You start with that. The way their mind works, I know because I was hardcore. They see the end and the beginning as like this unified theme of like from the beginning to the end, it's teaching a message, and the end did happen in the first century. You and me agree. We agree, though. We agreed that it was supposed to. But Dr. Price did a show with me on failed prophecy, and he touched on a lot of this where he's saying, well, it appears they expected this and it didn't happen. So now the doctrine changed to make it spiritual. So they're trying to make things that never really did happen become fulfilled in a manner in which they really didn't actually get fulfilled, because that's what you were talking about earlier.
If the temple gets destroyed, Jesus will rebuild it. Well, really? Well, symbolically in 3 days. See, we spiritualize the temple, don't we, in the Gospels? We spiritualize circumcision. We spiritualize descent from Abraham. We spiritualize everything so that it really doesn't have to be what the prophet said it had to be. No, the language in Paul, getting back to that was very, very interesting, is, in fact, seems to suggest that those under the law were redeemed in order that others could be adopted in. Because of is the implication in the Greek there. It's actually right in the face of what Io was saying. Quite to the contrary, what's happening is those under the law are being redeemed so that all these others can now be adopted and brought in. That's
I'll tell you this,
linguistic implication.
And even if that is inclusive of the regathering, as well as people that are from nations, because the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, has a lot of references, and many of them may talk about regathering, but is every single time that it talks about the nations, is it talking about a regathering? Because that's what I keep catching. The idea of only the regathering of the nations, and Abraham will be a father of many nations. So to them, the many nations that are being gathered are the Abraham
and
seed.
All we need
that's all
is
it is.
Abraham nations to know that all the nations, which is the general word for Gentile, or becomes the everybody other nations word. See, the mere fact that Abraham had been promised to be the ancestor of nations means that's it. Every time we read the word nations, we must be talking about those nations.
Well, let's not strawman them. I don't want to strawman them. But if it's salvific, so there's a prerequisite to that. The only people who need salvation.
So it's an important passage.
If it's an important passage,
right? Well, then how do we know then? If it's just the word nations, Gentiles, how do we know? What's the little signal? What's the little flag that comes out and says, okay, it's now salvic, therefore we have to interpret it as Abraham's descendants. Right. This is a generalized discussion of nations, therefore it can mean any random Gentile.
Well, see, that's a great question. That's why we got to get into the interpretation. And that's why I go to the Hebrew scholars as well.
I think my point is that there's not a little flag that jumps out. And IO seems to suggest that, well, no, All you have to do is know our context, our interpretive mechanism, and then you'll have the little flag that'll stick out.
Right.
It'll tell you when to interpret nations as descendants of Abraham and when to interpret nations otherwise.
That's why when I asked him about
the
Noah,
correct method, of course, the correct method, of course, is not that at all. We can't read anything into or out of the original text.
Right.
There are no little flags there.
I mean, because it's different authors, different books, but they may have different
authors, and they may have different ways they use words. But
like
that's not, I guess, not my point. My point is that if there was something like that going on, it's up to the author of the original material to tell us, I mean the descendants of Abraham here, or no, I mean any random Gentile here.
Right.
Since there is no distinction of that kind being made in the important passages, right?
At least remain ambiguous. At least say we don't know. Don't use that as a concrete dogmatic doctrine to imply your entire theoretical tower that you've built out of it.
Exactly. You can't use your theory to dictate the language.
Right.
The language has to dictate the theory.
I agree.
You've got it backwards in that sense. In other words, our interpretive mechanism, once you have our secret decoder ring, then we can interpret nations properly throughout the text. And I can tell you when to interpret it, in what context, in what sense, because I've got my secret decoder ring. Well, wait a minute here. There was no secret decoder ring given to us by Isaiah or in the Torah or by Paul. No, I read them only for what they're saying.
Real quick, James, you were going to
say something about Noah, too.
Yeah, I'm going to mention Noah, but Drew, I'm trying to get Candida Moss to join me. I don't know.
That would be great.
I don't have the gift of the Spirit to resurrect the dead, but I told her, I was like, look, what's it going to take to resurrect, to get you to do a show with me on the myth of persecution? Because a lot of what we find in the persecutions of Christianity are what she would say is myth. And I got to get the book, of course, before we do a show, but I'm hoping she'll bite. What I was going to say is
awesome book that is, though. The scholarship is brilliant. Most of the stories of Christian martyrs are legends, and we know they're legends, most of which can't be even true. So most of those Catholic martyrdom stories and all the saints, so on and forth, and so all
and
these
the miracles
things, it's really a literary trope.
Right.
It's really a fulfillment of the, hey, in the text it says, blessed are you when you're persecuted, and talking about, submitting to evildoers and loving your enemy. And it's written in a context of submission to evil and persecution.
Right.
Well, we have to have a tradition that fills that out. And so there's this whole tradition of martyrs and persecution. It's greatly overstated Christian persecution in the Roman period. We know there was a strong reality of persecuting Messianic rebel Jews in the first 2 centuries, and that's where the tradition comes from, and that's what explains the language in the Gospels. But it's a terrific book, and I really hope Professor Moss,
I definitely need to read it prior to interviewing her.
Yeah.
I will say this, though. I mentioned I always say that you got to take these books piece by piece, right? Ezra is not teaching what Isaiah is teaching necessarily. You got to really look at the context, look at these books, and consider that various ideas from Darius thought.
Jonah and Ezra may have totally different views of who can join Israel.
Right. Jonah, so looking at Jonah, you got the king of Nineveh that's repenting of his wickedness, clearly in chapter 3.
And he's not under the law. And he's not under the law.
Right. For what?
But he's wicked, though.
Right. He's wicked.
But he's not under the law, which is a strange paradox.
So
but he's clearly a foreigner.
I don't want to harp, right? I'm not here. This is not a throw stone show, right? This is us just pointing out things that I think are important. I can jump on board with Israel only on many points. But there are many points I also can't follow them through on. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. And so one of the things that I think are important is there's this buildup of only those who have the law technically are blessed or getting curses and things like that. And from my understanding, and I've said this on the show before, out of Jonah for a second, Abraham, you will be a blessing to many nations, right? But bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. I don't see, and I wish it did say, of your seed, or something like exclusively of your lineage. Because I see Egypt and the Pharaoh, when he tricked the Pharaoh by saying, say you're my sister, to his wife. and Pharaoh takes his wife in the bedroom, and he ends up with a disease, or what did he get? He got leprosy or something bad happened to him. Then he's like, take this away. What have you done to me? And, curse those who curse you, bless those who bless you. And you start seeing this happen in Exodus, God's fighting Egypt's gods. All these things are going on. And yes, it's through the framework of Israel that judgment comes, or blessings. But that's the whole point. Right. It comes through Israel that you get the blessings or your curses. So
if the law, see, it is one of the premises I think that a lot of IOers have, I don't know if all of them do, but one of the premises I think that most IOers have, at least, is that the Mosaic law was just a law that applied to a certain group of people and was not meant to apply to anyone else. Well, I don't like to use harsh absolutistic language, but I'm going to do it here. It is absurd to think that the Torah was not understood as the correct morality for all human beings. They were not sophisticated, philosophical, moral relativists 3,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness. Those are the correct morals that apply to everybody. And if foreigners don't live up to the Mosaic law, then they are inferior.
They're just as bad as the lost Israelites who were no longer God's people. So correct. Now
and the lost in need of redemption. In other words, how could Pharaoh have been spared from sin in escaping from sleeping with Sarah if he wasn't subject to God's moral law? How could it be Pharaoh? How could Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, be subject to punishment if he was not under the law? No, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, deserved the punishment that God gave him. He's a beast in the field. Mm-hmm. Pharaoh was spared sin, and who would have been worse than leprosy had he slept with Sarah? Okay, why? How could that be? Now, you can look at the law and say, okay, it was designed for Israel. Well, that's true. But, it's a totally modern perspective that we have that says, oh, well, this whole Bible is a Jewish thing. So it was all for Israel, and so it can be dismissed.
So, James, on that note,
those Jewish people really believed they had the truth from God.
Are there not prophecies where the nations would flock and say, we now know that your God is the one, the true God, and that they wanted to worship the God of Israel and learn Torah? So
absolutely,
there is this implication.
Just as the Levites have a special role within Israel as moral guardians, so too Israel has a role like the Levites do, but to the rest of humanity. As God's chosen people, they will bring enlightenment to the world. The prophets definitely and repeatedly suggest that the law is part of the blessing that the Messiah will bring. Again, Paul is turning that completely upside down.
Right.
He's saying you were free in the law. You can chuck the law. It's a burden. It's a curse. It's slavery.
So I got one more question.
Sure.
We'll wrap things up here because there's so much here. Yeah. I really want to take serious the position and having critical scholars analyze and assess this and delve into this deep. We're going to have Dr. Staples on, Dr. Carrier. I'm going to list a few things here before I ask you this last question, but here is my notes. Okay, so Christine Hayes, who's written on the Goyim, the others, where Goyim come from, she's not a dummy. Let's just give you a couple things. If you're not aware of who Dr. Christine Hayes is, Professor Christine Hayes, she's got a bachelor's in summa cum laude, Harvard University, master's and PhD in UC Berkeley, is Robert F. and Patricia R. Wise Professor of Religious Studies and Classical Judaica. That's how it sounds like it's pronounced. Before joining the Yale, she goes. There's a history on her her education.
Serious
it's long. It's a whole nother level. Yeah, I'm going to bring her on the show.
Right.
Yeah, she's going to talk about who these Gentiles are, and we're going to get into Paul and asking her like down into the real nitty gritty. Because technically, we're going to run into. I think what we're going to run into is a theological or spiritual implication rather than a literal historical implication. These are actual Israelites. I think that's what we're going to boil it down to, but. With that being said, we talked about the nations possibly coming in. My last question to you, James, is this. Io is correct in saying that there's a regathering prophecy being grabbed a hold of here, obviously. Yes. And anyone who's reading the New Testament should see, by analyzing this, there is that implication being utilized. Yes. My question is it exclusive that only the regathering of the two houses is what we're supposed to see? Or are the prophecies about nations in the Old Testament only the northern lost Israelites, or is there a first Israel, first the 12, right? This is a very focused. The hard part about it, and why I agree so much with Israel only, is that it's obvious. It's about Israel, duh. But Israel would be a priestly nation to the world, to the rest of the nations, to the table of nations. They were the set example. They were the example set. So my question to you, last question, to make that, I had to break this down a little bit, is it's obvious that the regathering of the 10, or if you will, the lost Israelites, the totality of the 12, Revelation 7 with 144,000, let's just say, obvious yes. Israel. Let's just use this as an example, and maybe this is a bad example. We need to get into the Greek and ask some critical scholars to get their thoughts on the people below who were innumerable. So you have a number, 144,000.
Be a countless number that may also be included.
Right. And is this the same? Because you have a numbered group and then an innumerable group.
Right.
How is the numbered and the innumerable the same
why would
group?
you mention both? Right. You wouldn't. So, in fact, the distinction appears to be that one is numberless and the other has a very specific number related to 12.
Right. So is it Israel first, then the nations, and they're trying to wrap prophecy up in the first century by giving this fulfillment?
Oh, yeah. Paul's view is that Israel did have a special role. They got the ball rolling. They made it possible for the rest of humanity to at least have potential inclusion in Israel. But I mean, what you're asking is, does it mean that yes, Israel comes first and then the Gentiles? Very much so. That's how Paul viewed it, and Israel did have a special role. But look at what they did. The prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Hosea all pointed out that look, the reason why the Assyrians and then the Babylonians won is that Israel, disobeyed the law. We violated the covenant. We let God down. We were the ones who deserved our punishment, if you will. We are the wayward Israelites, in effect. So that's why Torah orthodoxy, a return to Torah, is so critical. That's what caused the divorce. That's what caused the punishment. But the punishment that Paul seems to suggest is, boy, it's going a lot further than that. Now your punishment is so bad that you've kind of lost it, you guys. Now anyone could join precisely because Israel screwed up so very badly. Seems to be the implication, right? The implication is God divorced Israel because she was a harlot, a sinning harlot. But now this remarriage can include, her pagan sister.
Interesting.
There's really no question. But Israel played an important role historically in starting our relationship with God. But see,
so you take Paul different than Paula Fredrickson's conclusions and Dr. Staples to some extent. I think you go a little further in terms of allowing the replacement concept, so to speak, to fit into the bill. Whereas
I think Paul may view them in a sense as all spiritual descendants of Abraham. Okay. Literal descendants, I'm not sure.
But or if there is the literal, everyone had it.
But he's sure, exactly. Because he's surely opening the potential up to everybody. In other words, everybody is a potential elect.
Okay.
Not all of Israel is elect, right? You got some sinners among Israel who just don't see the way, right? So when you say all Israel will be saved, what do we mean? All the elect of Israel. And this includes people who are not descendants of Israel in the literal sense.
Interesting. Okay. Well, look, we're going to wrap this up because we've got to have more. I want to get Dr. Staples on. I'd like to see Israel only communicate with him. I'd like to see some interaction with him, especially since his entire, PhD's built on this exact
I would defer,
point.
I've thrown out what my opinion is. I would, in many ways, defer to Dr. Staples.
And I'm not sure I'm going to say this on air. I'm not sure I agree with everything that you've said about it, right? But we are brothers. We communicate. We're open. I'm hearing you out. I want to hear you.
My God, yes. That's the way it has to be. In other words, I recognize that I have something to learn from Dr. Staples. Shouldn't,
I got something to learn from Israel only.
And
whether I agree with everything, no. But
Israel only should recognize.
I like better personality.
And by the same token, Israel only should recognize that we're recognizing the at least the parts that we see as valid in their argument. There is this regathering prophecy. It is about Israel. Paul is talking about descent from Abraham in an important sense. But is that a spiritual descent that is open to everyone? Okay, I'm done with
No,
my
I get it. I get it. Yes. So yes, he takes a more universal aspect to the New Testament, whereas as a Calvinist that I once was, I get these little like itchy feelings every time I hear all and every and all that. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
but then again, I didn't know Greek, so there is some interesting stuff here, and there's. I'm going to have some delving into some deep topics here. Here's some upcoming stuff, guys. We're going to have Mark Goodacre, Dr. Mark Goodacre. Fingers crossed I can get him in person. We're going to talk about the gospel Q. Was there really a gospel Q? And I'm sure he has some other goodies. If I can get him in person, the camera gear will be a lot better than this. This is webcam. Dr. Richard Carrier is going to come on for a couple of shows. After September, I think he'll have enough time to have delved into the topic. We wrote approximately 70-page PDF document on Israel only, collecting data verbatim from the mouth of the horse itself. So you cannot say, oh, straw man, or you misrepresented the view. Okay, we copy and pasted, and there are clear implications. We do a little legwork. Some of the Greek scholars I have do a little legwork on the passages in the way that they interpret. Some of these are very ambiguous passages, which we've talked about earlier briefly. So be on the lookout for that.
Yeah, there is room for... but Stephen Nelson has done a really brilliant job of breaking it down for us, because he really does know the subtleties of Greek, and it's important
he's doing
to have
great.
Someone. Yeah.
Camille Gregor is going to be coming on. Hopefully I can get him to debate some Christians. We're going to have he has a different view on the debate he wants to do, where he's presenting a positive case on an alternate explanation for the resurrection than the one that's posited by Christians. Because usually what happens is Christians are saying on the affirmative, yes, he resurrected, and others are saying, no, doubt it. Here's why you need to doubt it. Well, he's saying, I want to come on the affirmative and present a view that I think's better than the one that is presented, of course, by Christians, and they're supposed to defend in the negative, so to speak. No, that's not, and here's why. It'd be a first of its kind that I've ever seen online with that, and we're working on it right now. I'm in communication with a couple different apologists on this topic. Dr. John J. Collins, I'm going to have him back. Guy's got a list, education list and books that's just ridiculous. He's a scholar. And Dr. Joshua Bowen, who talks about slavery in the Hebrew scriptures, and he's more of an Old Testament or Hebrew Bible scholar.
Right.
He reads Assyrian or the Assyrian languages in their originals and stuff too. I want to bump heads with Skylar Fiction a little. He has a YouTube channel. I think we got a lot in common. He does different things on his channel than I do. I'm probably going to have Aaron Raw back on. There's a potential PhD candidate right now that is a student of Dr. Ehrman, Ian Mills. I plan on having him join us on Myth Vision podcast at some point. He's dating the extra biblical gospels, and he knows a lot about Marcion and the Gospel of Thomas, which, for full preterist, if you have not read the Gospel of Thomas, you really should, because according to that gospel, the resurrection had already happened.
Right.
Really weird that he's teaching this, and this is a gospel that is supposedly written around the same contemporaneous time that the synoptics are. Full preterist, you might want to go check that out. Dr. Price, I've got more in the chamber still with him. It's so easy for me to launch that material too, because I go meet him in person right down the street. And right now, and these are just off the cuff, Russell Gamirkin, we're going to be talking about his book, Berosus and Genesis, Manetho and Exodus, Hellenistic Histories, and the Date of the Pentateuch. So be on the lookout, guys. There's going to be a lot coming. And James,
you're doing everything, but there's
a lot more.
I just love it. You're interested in every aspect of biblical studies under the sun. I'm
glorious. Interested in interviewing Israel only full preterists.
Right. Every theory out there. Let's get a dialogue going. Let's consider it all.
Let's talk. Let's talk. Friendly talk, bro.
Civil engagement is a necessary part of getting at the truth. It really is. And what we need to do is we need to take each other seriously. We need to recognize that we're all sincere here. We need to interpret each other's theories as sympathetically as possible. If I'm criticizing IO, at least let me state IO in such a way that they would say, yeah, that's the theory. Right. And they should be able to do the same for us.
I think that what
happens...
Instead
of talking about each other, let's talk about the theories.
Let's talk about the theories, yeah. Because, I mean, look, it's easy to get really frustrated really quick when you talk about this. Are you dumb? Do you not see it? Well, look,
maybe I am dumb. Yeah,
You might be
slow.
ignorant. Yeah, you might be
Right,
ignorant.
but you know, can you break it down for someone who's a little slower, maybe?
Right. I just personalities, man. Personalities.
Get those personalities out of it.
You know, there's a saying in the recovery community: principles before personalities. And I think having these principles will help us get more people being educated and have real scholars take a look at the theories that we talk about, because I really want to filter it through peer review. I don't want this to sit in the corner under a lampshade, so to speak, as the Bible would use the language. No, guys, if you're right, and you know, I've heard this say, Israel only, for example, is the Christianity killer, right? Supposedly, it will kill Christianity.
Right.
And if it's true, it really will. If it's
Right.
true, dude, it
Right.
will. But either way, even so will fulfill prophecy. But anyway, my point is if it's true, what are we doing? Only like discussing this in small corners.
Right.
Let's get the big names
Let's get
bringing
the
this
truth
out there. Make
Right.
this a media presentation.
Whoever is right, whether Roman Providence is right, or IO is right, or Orthodox Christianity is right. Whoever is right, the only hope we have of getting at the truth is to get all the theories out there and for everyone to involve themselves in an open, critical engagement with one another.
100%, brother. So with that being said, I really do appreciate you joining me. And last minute too, dude, I just threw this together, man. This was not like a planned podcast at all. I didn't even know we were going to get into a long discussion on this, really, because we didn't even talk about the Roman provenance theory ultimately and going into that. But for another time, we've got to do a show. Someone asked me, a close friend of mine wants to hear what is the book? We talked about Operation Messiah.
Oh, yes.
Paul being a Roman spy, infiltrating this messianic movement by flipping it upside down as well. But we got to talk about that book. I know that Dr. Price wrote a review on it. He thought it was interesting. He doesn't buy it completely, but you know, he's open. You know, like he has theories.
I think I agree with Dr. Price that it takes Acts on face value too easily. In other words, it accepts as history just about everything that Acts is telling us if it's a concrete event. And I think we have good grounds to question Acts. On the other hand, the picture it paints of Acts is correct. I mean, Acts, it's an analysis, it's a revolutionary analysis of Paul and Acts. We really have to have this discussion.
Yeah, because the Romans bail him out every damn time.
Every time.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you very much for joining me, and thank everyone who paid attention. And even with my sorry thumbnail that doesn't really grab attention, I try to get that changed. I next time I'll take my time and figure out how to put the thumbnail on there. But with that being said, we are Myth Vision. Thank you, brother. Really appreciate it.